Yeah, so good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to see you all here today, and it's good to be here today. I asked Jim Minshew to bring in one of his treasures for us to marvel at. It's a Christmas creche, and it's right up here on the table, the altar area here. When we have a break, or when you're going for coffee, please come by and see it. It was made by an artist friend who lived in Sewanee, Tennessee, when we both were there in divinity school at Sewanee. She's the wife of one of our favorite theology professors, and her name is Barbara Hughes. The distinctive thing about this Christmas creche is that all the people and all the creatures have these big old smiles on their faces. My favorite is the goat in the back with the sideways look, the guffaw. This was big stuff in the Episcopal Church for a while and was at the National Cathedral in the 90s. So it's kind of cool to see it again. Fond memories of it. Would you lead us in the chalice lighter quotation, Andy? Please. While Andy's coming forward to do that, I have a little bit of an announcement to make. And it is that, the part of the ceremony where we share our joys and sorrows and everything in between. Today I have some candles to light and put in this bowl. This is Paul's idea. Where's Paul? Yeah, and we talked about it last time. I thought it was brilliant. And so during our time together, the joys and concerns and everything in between will be a part of our focus. And I think that's a beautiful addition. Thank you, Paul. Okay, Andy.
This is a piece by Howard Thurman. It was written in 1953. Keep alive the dream in the heart. As long as we have a dream in our heart, we cannot lose the significance of living. It is a part of the pretensions of modern life to traffic in what is generally called realism. I think you can substitute heart for hope here. People cannot continue long to live if the dream in the heart has perished. It is then that they stop hoping, stop looking, and the last embers of their anticipations fade away. The dream in the heart is the outlet. The dream is the quiet persistence in the heart that enables a man or woman to live out the storms of his churning experiences. It is the exciting whisper moving through the aisles of the spirit, answering the monotony of limitless days of dull routine. It is the ever-recurring melody in the midst of the broken harmony and harsh discords of human conflict. It lives in the inward parts. It is the deep within, where the issues of life and death are ultimately determined. Keep alive the dream, for as long as we have a dream in our hearts, we cannot lose the significance of living.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Boy, that's so apropos for today. Thank you. Let us join together. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. And now we will have some music.
So Joy to the World, and then we'll do another one after that. All right? Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare in brew. And heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven
His love, and wonders of His love, and wonders of His love. Beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Next one is O Beautiful Star of Bethlehem. And it may not be as well known, but it's known better in these parts of the country. Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shining far through shadows dim, giving the light for those who long have gone, guiding the wise men on their way unto the place where Jesus lay. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shining on. Beautiful star, the hope of life, guiding the pilgrims through the night, over the mountains till the break of dawn. Into the land of perfect day, it will give out a lovely ray. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on us until the glory dawns. Give us the light to light the way unto the land of perfect day. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Beautiful star, the hope of grace, for the redeemed, the good and the blessed, yonder in glory when the crown is won. Jesus is now the star divine, brighter and brighter he will shine. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine upon us until the glory dawns. Give us the light to light the way unto the land of perfect day. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Give us the light to light the way unto the land of perfect day. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on.
Beautiful, thank you. And now, okay. I put slides in the slide deck sometimes just to remind me not to forget something, and I want to make sure Kathy and Terry's.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
We're going to do One Child in Bed.
What child is this who lay to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, where shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ our Lord, whom good shepherds call and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him love, the precious Son of Mary. So bring him meats and gold and myrrh, come peasant king, to own him. The King of Kings, so be
written by Christine Robinson, a Unitarian minister. It's entitled A Christmas Meditation. Let's join our hearts and minds together in the spirit of meditation and prayer. May these moments of quiet lead us to the heart of the season, which is peace. May we breathe deeply of peace in this quiet place, relax into its warmth, and know that we are safe here. Let us open our hearts to the evening's story. Like the wandering couple, may we find that our greatest trials issue forth from our greatest joys. Like the harried innkeeper, may we find ways to be of help to others. Like the lumbering beast, may we be silent witnesses to the unfathomable glory of life. Like the shepherds on the hill, may we know that we need never be afraid. Like the journeying wise, may we always have the courage to follow our stars. Like the angels, may we cry peace to a troubled world. Holy One, to these prayers for our own transformation, we add our prayers for all of those who suffer and grieve this evening and this morning. May they find comfort. And we add our prayers for all those involved in war. May they be safe. And may the season of peace and goodwill nudge our world towards its ideals. For then will Christmas truly dawn. Amen. Today I want to talk about the hope of Christmas. And I want to start out with a quotation from a famous Unitarian minister, the Reverend A. Powell Davies. The quotation is this: "Let us open our hearts to Christmas. Open them to all the hope that stands against a world that wastes with evil things. Open them wide enough for gentleness in a world that is bitter and harsh, for loveliness in a world that is desolate, for faith and its joy and the song of its joy that sings in the presence of God." This quotation is from Powell Davies, an esteemed and influential Unitarian minister in the 50s. His influence was spread far and wide, and he was most notably the senior minister at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., a church that grew so much that they had to have 7 satellite congregations spin off from it. Talk about a miracle of Christmas. Yeah. Time magazine said that he was one of America's outstanding clergymen, and that in Washington, where many talk but few listen, Davies is a man who was heard. This notable Unitarian minister was very fond of the Christmas season, and so this morning, in honor of him in a way, in honor of the time we're marking in our lives, I want to invite you, as I invite myself to open myself, and invite you to open yourself up to open your heart up to Christmas. But then you have to ask the question, well, what does that mean? And which Christmas? There's a whole lot of stuff going on out there in the world. There's so many Christmas traditions and rituals, snapshots and stories. Many of them have become stories about the stories of the story. They're derivative. We have the initial Christmas event, then we have a manger scene, and then we have movies about the manger scene and the story of the manger scene. And then you have movies that have little or nothing to do with it that become Christmas favorites, like one of my favorites, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Clark Griswold isn't concerned about the babe in Bethlehem. He's got 2 big concerns. He wants to outshine all of his neighbors in having the most audacious lights on his roof. And he plans to take his Christmas bonus and build a swimming pool. I'm not sure how that relates to Christmas so much, but it is a beloved movie this time of year. Along the way in his story, there are such unforgettable encounters like Cousin Eddie. And for those of you who have seen it, remember Cousin Eddie's first appearance. He's unforgettable. And there are others too, you know. What about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? You know, I mean, that's kind of a story about the story about the story about the story, maybe. Or It's a Wonderful Life, you know. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. How beloved is that film? And Christmas Story. How many of you have seen Christmas Story? You'll shoot your eye out. You got to be careful with that Red Ryder BB gun. Then there's the Grinch who stole Christmas. I mean, come on, people. Leave Christmas alone. The Little Drummer Boy and Grandma getting run over by a reindeer. And who could forget Charlie Brown? Especially Linus, when this character who's carried around this blanket, this security blanket with him throughout the whole episode of the cartoon, suddenly finds the courage to walk out on the stage and to lay his security blanket down and recite for the people the Christmas story from the New Testament Gospel of Luke. One of the things a lot of churches do this time of year is to have a creche. And you'll see as I mentioned earlier, one of my favorites right here. Jim Minshew was very kind to bring it. Where did we get the idea of having a Christmas creche? I mean, you think about it. That's kind of weird. Well, Francis of Assisi came up with this idea in the year 1223. He got permission from Pope Honorius III to set up a manger with hay and 2 live animals, an ox and a donkey, in his small Italian village. He then invited villagers to come and gaze upon this manger. We don't know if he had anything else in the manger or not, but they would come out and listen to him preach about the babe of Bethlehem. He had authentic props. The nativity scene genre took off from there, and within a couple of centuries, nativity scenes and creches were spread throughout all the churches in Europe. When my daughter Margaret was growing up, we had a Christmas creche too. She loved that thing. She loved to play with the figurines and imagine what it must have been like to be in that original Christmas story. One of my memorable, best memories of that time is that she called the wise men the wise guys. And when we set up the creche, we didn't have all the people there together because they were coming from afar. Remember the King James Version? They came from afar. Doesn't mean they were firemen, but they came from a long way off. So we set up the wise guys on one end of the house, and as we got closer to Christmas, they'd make their way. And she loved to play with the baby Jesus. So much so that we lost him one year. Yeah, and Jesus didn't show up for Christmas. But we found him, and then the next year we decided we better hide the baby Jesus so we don't run into that moral dilemma again. Well, we hid the baby Jesus so well that we couldn't find it ourselves. I'll never forget having a dinner party one night with our Episcopalian friends, and all of a sudden from down the hall we hear this joyful shrieking, "I found Jesus! I found Jesus!" Our Episcopalian friends were thinking she was having some kind of religious conversion. Found Jesus. Anyone here go through the travails of being in a Christmas pageant? Yeah. For 5 years running, I was a shepherd in a bathrobe with an itchy beard. I think Christmas creches were just like stained glass windows in the medieval churches for, folks who were illiterate back then. The stories in the stained glass were the stories from the Bible, and they could be taught visually, and it wasn't dependent upon people to be able to read. So also, I think Francis maybe had an intention of spreading wide the idea of the Christmas creche. And so that took root, and you see them all over the place in towns and you see a wide variety of styles of Christmas creches, everything from the big plastic ones you plug in to real live animals. I've seen some of that in some of the churches I've been in the same town of in years past. And there's something about this time of year that sparks a sense of wonder, awe, and fascination about the intersection of the sacred with the human, or the sacred with the profane, the divine with humanity, and with the wider creation. There's an underside to the Christmas story, too, that I'd like to just share from theologian, what's his name? Jeff Hood. He invites us to take a wider look at the implications of the historical account of the Christmas story, lest we fall too deeply into this sentimental sort of experience. He said that Joseph and Mary were forced to travel an incredibly long distance. For what? To pay taxes. The poor are always forced to do more. There were no medical professionals to help Mary in her final days of her pregnancy. Prenatal care is still non-existent for most women in the world. These folks didn't even have a place to sleep. Homelessness is the true pandemic facing the world today. The innkeeper provided Mary and Joseph with the worst possible accommodations, and they called it charity. This is how most of our society thinks about helping people, doing the absolute minimum. A variety of animals were being kept tied up as property. Creation still yearns to be free. Childbirth is a dangerous event and remains so for women throughout the world. These are important points to ponder as we contemplate the Christmas story as it is originally told and as we understand it today. I want to take a more foundational and archetypal tack on the Christmas story. I want to return to the invitation of Powell Davies and invite you and myself this morning to open our hearts to Christmas. Not accommodate a story whose dogma that you may find unreasonable or unacceptable. Not to drink too deeply of the overly saccharine sweetness of this season's sentimentality. Not to shut down your mind, close your eyes, and tap out your shoes together like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. But as he said, to open our hearts to hope of goodness that stands against the evils in the world. There are many bad guys in the world, and we're all too familiar with them, aren't we? But there are heroes too. Some of them are right here in our midst. All of us are. To open our hearts to gentleness in a world that's bitter, harsh, and unforgiving, and the dog-eat-dog rat race that becomes a modern life. To open our hearts to loveliness in the face of the world's ugliness and desolation, especially the ugliness that we face in our anxiety during this pandemic. And to open our hearts and embrace kindness in a world filled with hate, born of political polarization. The Christmas story has so many meanings. May we open our hearts to what we know is undeniable and unquestionable. That love overcomes hate. That kindness can build a bridge and melt the hearts of discord and anger and unkindness. That generosity is counterintuitive because we find out that when we give, we receive. And what a beautiful experience that is. And to embrace the idea that gratitude can make even the most difficult situations in life somehow manageable. So this morning, I want to wish you a blessed Christmas. May the hope and goodness of the season cut through all of our attempts to commercialize it and twist it into a bit of consumerist propaganda. That's a mouthful. In closing, I want to share with you one of my favorite Christmas stories. It's a little sentimental, but the point is really profound. And take note, this might be the only time you hear me reference Guidepost magazine. It's called The Christmas Pageant. For years now, whenever Christmas pageants are talked about in a certain little town in the Midwest, someone is sure to mention the name of Wallace Perling. Wally's performance in one annual production of the Nativity play has slipped into the realm of legend. But the old-timers who were in the audience that night never tire of recalling exactly what happened. Wally was 9 that year and in the 2nd grade, though he should have been in the 4th. Most people in town knew that he had difficulty keeping up. He was big and awkward, slow in movement and mind. Still, Wally was well liked by the other children in his class, and all of whom were smaller than he was, though the boys had trouble hiding their irritation when Wally would ask to play ball with them, or any game for that matter, in which winning was important. They'd find a way to keep him out. But Wally would hang around anyway, not sulking, just hoping. He was a helpful boy, always willing and smiling, and the protector, paradoxically, of the underdog. If the older boys chased the younger ones away, it would be Wally who'd say, "Can't they stay? They're no bother." Wally fancied the idea of being a shepherd in the Christmas pageant. But the play's director, Miss Lombard, assigned him a more important role. After all, she reasoned, the innkeeper did not have too many lines, and Wally's size would make his refusal of lodging to Joseph more forceful. And so it happened that the usual large partisan audience gathered for the town's yearly extravaganza of crooks and creches, of beards, crowns, halos, and a whole stage full of squeaky voices. No one on stage or off was more caught up in the magic of that night than Wallace Perling. They said later that he stood in the wings and watched their performance so intently and with so much fascination that Miss Lombard had to make sure he didn't wander out on stage before his time. He was an eager boy. Then the time came for Joseph, when he appeared, slowly, tenderly guiding Mary to the door of the inn. Joseph knocked on the door, set in the painted backdrop. Wally, the innkeeper, was already there, waiting. "What do you want?" Wally said, swinging the door open with a brusque gesture. "We seek lodging." "Seek it elsewhere." Wally spoke vigorously. "The inn is filled." "Sir, we've asked everywhere in vain. We've traveled so far and we're very weary. There is no room in the inn for you." Wally looked properly stern. "Please, good innkeeper, this is my wife Mary. She's heavy with child and needs a place to rest. Surely you must have some small corner for her. She's so tired." Now, for the first time, Wally, the innkeeper, relaxed his stiff stance and looked down at Mary. With that, there was a long pause, long enough to make the audience a bit tense with embarrassment. Had he forgotten his lines? "No, be gone," the prompter whispered to him from backstage. "No," Wally repeated automatically. "Be gone." Joseph sadly placed his arm around Mary, and Mary laid her head upon her husband's shoulder, and the two of them started to move away. The innkeeper did not return inside his inn, however. Wally stood there in the doorway, watching this forlorn couple walk away. His mouth was open, his brow was creased with concern, and his eyes were unmistakably filling with tears. And suddenly, this Christmas pageant became different from all the others. Don't go, Joseph, Wally cried out. Bring Mary back. And Wallace Perlin, his face grew into a bright, big smile, said, "You can have my room." Some people in town thought the pageant had been ruined. But there were others, many, many others, who considered it the most Christmas of all Christmas pageants they had ever seen.
That's so sweet.
Isn't that beautiful?
That's so sweet.
I love that story. I can just see Wally. I think I knew a Wally when I was in grade school. Maybe I was Wally part of the time, I don't know. But he knew what it felt like to be left out. And that tenderness in his heart tied in with his own experience tugged at him when he saw someone else who was going to be left out. So Merry Christmas, my dear friends, loved ones, partners in crime, friends new and old. I wish you the best this holiday season, and that in the midst of all the stuff we hear on our airwaves and we see on our television sets, and we see some of it good, maybe some of it not so good, may the true meaning of Wally's understanding of Christmas touch you in a profound way as you find a place for yourself. May we also find a place for others, as Wally did. Merry Christmas.